Why is it in Kenyan politics that we don't think it is important to link key political events in our country? Why? And yet we know from what has happened in the past that especially in politics, virtually everything is linked. Even in this life, things that happen to us every day, if you take a closer look, virtually everything is linked. Very, very few events and things that happen to us are not linked to the rest that is happening. The courts passed a landmark ruling nullifying the Kenya Kwanza majority in parliament. In other words, they ruled that the Azimio coalition is the majority. And not only that, they opened a can of legal worms. Speaker Wetangula's ruling was illegal. And if you don't believe that that opens a can of legal worms, you just need to ask yourself, what are the legal implications of making an illegal key ruling? The court also ruled that Speaker Wetangula, remaining the party leader of Ford Kenya political party and Speaker at the same time, is very unconstitutional. Now, isn't that obvious? What I mean, shouldn't that have been obvious to Bwana Wetangula? Shouldn't that have been obvious to Kenya Kwanza and its leader? And let us never forget for one single second that in law, ignorance can never be a defense, has never been a defense. And so you cannot go before a court of law and say, I am sorry, I was not aware of this law, and therefore I urge this court to take into consideration my ignorance. You can never do that. You will never get anywhere with that defense. A can of very smelly legal worms has been released. Now I'm aware of the fact that most Kenyans are yawning and they're telling themselves impunity will prevail. The politicians will simply ignore this court ruling like they have ignored many, many others, and life will continue as normal. Nothing like that. And allow me to come back to that shortly. Okay, we're talking about things which are linked. And then shortly after this ruling, the people of Isiolo, the people of Isiolo, the people of Isiolo showed President William Ruto dust. You go to address people, you go to highlight the goodies that you brought to them, and they're screaming back that you're a liar. They're screaming back, Ruto must go. Ruto must go. This can be compared to a boxer in a ring taking punch after punch, major punch after major punch. How long can they remain on their feet? That becomes the question. And that is precisely the political situation we are in the country called Kenya. Those two major political developments in the country, following each other in quick succession, you cannot convince me that the impact is zero. And you cannot convince yourself, lie to yourself, that the impact is zero. The impact is very huge. But let's go back to the court ruling. You know, it is important to understand the thinking of politicians and how politics works. Very early in my political lessons, under the tutelage of my late political lecturer, he kept referring to that William Shakespeare classic, Julius Caesar. Yeah, the play. And for many years, I never understood why. Let me be totally honest with you. Bila kizungu mingi, I believe the reason was this play shows us very clearly how politicians behave. And it emphasizes that in politics, when a politician, not even many politicians, when a politician smells blood, it is very dangerous for somebody who is in power. Because human nature is such that they can quickly convince others to make a move. And indeed in Julius Caesar, it is very interesting how some people got involved in the plot when they were still 50-50. They were not really fully convinced, but they still agreed to move against Julius Caesar. Bottom line, the recent court ruling, even if the government totally ignores it, has left President William Ruto extremely vulnerable. That is a fact you cannot run away from. Yeah, and let's start there. It means, in other words, it has opened the floodgates of scheming by very ambitious politicians. And make no mistake about it, our parliament has no shortage of ultra ambitious politicians. There's no shortage of them. And I'm sure many of us, many of you, will totally agree with me on that. In the very same way, so many politicians crossed over from Azimio to support the Kenya Kwanza regime after the 2022 presidential elections. In the very same manner, many of those politicians and others can decide to cross back to Azimio. And we cannot rule out somebody coming up with the idea of impeaching President Ruto. We can't rule that out. And there is something else here very important. Okay? An impeachment motion against Ruto does not have to succeed. Hapana. It just has to start. People just need to start talking about it in Parliament. And already, that is going to have a very devastating effect on this shaky regime. Make no mistake about that. Why? Because the last thing the Ruto regime needs right now is for the cracks to start being visible. It is one thing and a very different thing for analysts to talk about the cracks. And it is yet another deadly thing for those cracks to be visible via remarks by members of Parliament on the floor of the House. Those two are very different. And I'm sure you get what I'm saying. Because the predictable, very predictable outcome of this is that it will make the cracks wider. Okay? It will cause the cracks to appear everywhere. How does a multi-storied building collapse? A building which looks very solid. How does it come crumbling down? Experts tell us it usually starts with a very small crack. And this crack, from that very small tiny size, becomes bigger and bigger. And then what happens next is that that crack causes many other cracks to emerge all over the place. And then, very shortly after that, the building collapses. That is the chain of events. And then we need to remember something else. UDA insiders, allies of President Ruto, those close to him, do you remember what they've been talking about? They have been talking about getting rid of Speaker Wetangula. Indeed, if you allow me to remind you, even Moses Wetangula himself came out and talked about this issue. The long and short of what he was saying is jaribu. Just try. Okay? And now, after this court ruling, an excellent damage control strategy would be to abandon Bwana Wetangula, to leave him alone holding the mess. In other words, to use him as the scapegoat. And then the Kenya Kwanza coalition can negotiate with its partners, including its latest partner, the ODM party, as a way of weathering this latest storm. And by the way, that is a very high likelihood in this particular instance. Okay, but we'll need to wait and see. All in all, those who have been saying things are boiling nicely may now want to reconsider and change that phrase to the following: things are now boiling violently. Very, very violently. Okay? Now, before I go, I need to tell you about the very latest Kumekucha special report that will give you a very clear picture of some of the ultra-sensitive things happening behind the scenes. Do you remember the leader of a country called Syria? The fall of Assad was very swift and unexpected. Okay, that's what the media said. However, many analysts agreed that the signs were always there. Okay, now most of us agree that in the Kenyan situation, the signs have always been there for a long time. Now, there are some signs that may not be very easy to talk about on a public channel like this one. My very latest special report exposes and talks about all that. Now you can see details on your screens right now. For only Kenya shillings 3,999, you can have this very revealing special report pop in your inbox. Please move with speed, because this offer is available for a very, very short time. Until next time, this is Chris Kumekucha.